Welcome to our commercial real estate series titled Behind the Building, uncovering the strategies, the people, and the decisions that shape commercial real estate. I love connecting with people, I love commercial real estate, and I enjoy teaching. So, by hosting these interviews, I hope to give the audience a behind the scenes look at different aspects of commercial real estate, featuring industry professionals and leaders who we work with every day to make it all happen. In this segment, we are unpacking the 1031 exchange, looking at how investors are able to preserve wealth through property swaps. And here with me to talk about how 1031 exchanges help build wealth is Matt Linville, also known as that 1031 guy. He's with Investors Title Exchange Corp, a firm that acts as a qualified intermediary in tax-deferred real estate exchanges. Welcome, Matt. So let's just start by having you explain what a 1031 exchange is and how it actually can be a vehicle for building generational wealth.
Sure. So, Emily, the IRS has given us a gift. And what the IRS allows a taxpayer to do, if they own real property and that real property has been held for business or investment use, and when they begin the decision and actually sell that piece of property, instead of the IRS requiring them to pay the gains that would be due, the IRS said through this 1031 like-kind exchange, as long as you take those proceeds and you roll that into other real property that, again, you would hold for business or investment use, then the IRS will allow you to defer the tax you would normally pay. Now, it's not an exemption. There's a possibility that through the 1031, instead of paying the tax that they would normally pay on the sale, now they could have up to 30, 35% more of the equity preserved that can now be redeployed into additional real estate. Most of all, I think, Emily, is what is all behind the workings of this 1031 and why we want investors to know about it, is it's not a one-time deal. So you are able to daisy chain not just one, but 10 exchanges together over your lifetime, 20 exchanges, however many make sense within a lifetime, and you continually defer that tax on down the road, on down the road, on down the road until something happens that we don't like to talk about, Emily, which is dying. But through death, if the estate planning laws stay the same, and if the step up in basis remains, then the hope is they can pass along that real estate portfolio they were able to build through tax deferral onto their children through their estate. Children get a step up in basis, and hopefully all that tax that they deferred in their lifetime goes away, and the children inherit a portfolio of properties that the parent or parents are very, very happy and proud to pass along. Yeah.
So a lot of details surrounding a 1031 exchange and making it happen. So tell me about what a qualified intermediary is and
Mhm.
why no one should try to do it without
Yeah.
having one and having an expert being able to handle all those details.
The IRS put forth that, listen, if a taxpayer wants to do a 1031, unless it's a direct deed transfer, if there's three parties, more than two parties involved in that exchange, then the IRS said a qualified intermediary needs to be involved. And our responsibility lies with the taxpayer being a great fiduciary proponent of theirs in preparing the exchange agreement that outlines the 1031, how we're going to work together, how it works in general, the things in there that the IRS wants to see. And that exchange agreement that's prepared is, you shouldn't close without it. What the IRS says, you must have an exchange agreement signed and dated in place by at least the closing table. If not, you don't have a 1031.
So back up a little bit and talk about those actual milestones that happen after you have sold the property, the money's with you all,
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah,
funds are there, and now you've got so many days to make some steps.
that's
And
right. And I like that you call them milestones. Some people call them pain points. They certainly can be pain points, but I like milestones because the IRS certainly did put some time limitations on the 1031 like-kind exchange for the taxpayer. And there's two clocks, Emily, and both of those clocks begin to tick the day the taxpayer closes on the sale of their piece of property. And that's the 45-day identification period and the 180-day exchange period. The taxpayer has 45 calendar days to identify potential replacement property in their 1031. And I always stress calendar days. They're not business days, so that means weekends, holidays, rainy days and Mondays, and I just don't feel like it.
Holidays.
All of those count. The important thing about the 45-day is we want to make sure that that client has identified in writing the property or properties they would potentially buy in their 1031 like-kind exchange. And we need those by midnight of day 45. And why that's either a milestone or a pain point is those days go by so very quickly, Emily. And a lot can happen within those 45 days, whether it be through market attrition, whether it be through a true due diligence, or the property just falls off the market. Those 45 days can go by quickly if they're not already looking out and already doing their research, if they're not already working with you, Emily, and saying, listen, we're considering selling and doing an exchange. Can you and I go ahead and start looking at properties? Let's go ahead and start our conversation so that when that 45-day timeline does begin officially, we're already well ahead of the game and talking about the properties we may or may not want to identify in those 45 days.
Right. So if someone has talked to you, they've relinquished their property, right? The previous property. And what if it does fall on New Year's Day, their 45 calendar day? Are you calling them 2 days ahead or whatnot and saying, where's your replacement property? You know, where's that list? Because you can identify up to 3, right?
That's correct. You can identify 3, and in some cases you can identify even more depending upon the rule you use. But I think I can kindly describe ourselves as pushers.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah, we're going to push that taxpayer, giving them reminders along the way. You know, you've got 40 days, you've got 30 days, you've got 15 days. The great thing about doing that is the identification is fluid in that 45-day period.
Okay.
So if they need to add to or take away, change that identification in any way, they certainly can. So even if they've identified property and we have record of it, we'll still notify them and help remind them that they have a certain amount of days just in case they need to change it or amend it in any way.
And so the 180 days, tell us about that milestone.
So that is the time frame the taxpayer has to actually complete the 1031, meaning to close and take title to any or all of the property that they may have identified. So to our 180-day, Emily, that is what the IRS gave us as a time frame for actually completing the 1031. So that means that we are closing, taking title to any or all of the property that was identified in the exchange. Now, I will say that the actual time frame the IRS allows us is either 180 days or until your tax filing due date, whichever one is less. And it's really important, Emily, that people know the qualified intermediary is not allowed. Matter of fact, the IRS says that we cannot act in the capacity of a legal or tax advisor.
So Matt, you mentioned about the boot before.
Define
that, and from a practical standpoint, how does that work? What does it mean as it relates to the 1031?
Sure. So boot, of course, when we talk about boot, that is the potentially taxable portion of a real estate deal in general. And when it comes to 1031, boot is important to discuss because the overall question to me is, if I'm selling for $1 million, Matt, how much of that money do I have to reinvest to get a tax deferral? What the IRS tells us is that if you're selling for $1 million, then they want you to buy a property or properties worth at least $1 million if you want your full tax deferral. Because the misconception is, well, Matt, all I need to do is reinvest my gain. And that's not the way the IRS looks at it. So again, selling for $1 million, I want to buy property or properties for at least $1 million. However, two things. Number one, we know that $1 million really isn't $1 million. So we have attorney's fees, we have closing costs. And number two, it's not an all or nothing deal. And so if they don't want to reinvest everything, that's perfectly fine. Whatever they reinvest is up for potential deferral. Whatever they walk away with is boot and up for potential taxation. Now, one interesting quirk, Emily, is debt in the 1031. Debt relief, if not replaced with cash or new debt, could be taxed as well. So we want to make sure that they have full knowledge of that, and they're talking with their tax advisor to make sure they're using all the money necessary to defer what they hope to defer.
Because the tax attorney or the CPA will be able to do all the calculations and run the scenarios on what it actually means to their bottom line, what they would owe if they did X, Y, and Z, or didn't have a full replacement property value to what they relinquished, right?
That's exactly right. That is the hope. I think at the end of the day, Emily, the clients that you're working with are wanting to see the numbers. And that's the common strain between the person who's selling the $100 million shopping center to the $50,000 lake lot that they bought. It's about the numbers. It's about what the deferral can save them, how they can reinvest it and make it grow for them.
And Matt, that's a really good segue to the next discussion item about what actually is a like-kind property. How does that work? How broad is it in the definition of the IRS code?
From east to west, Emily, it is very broad. So again, the definition that the IRS gives us is it's any real property for any other real property as long as it's being held for the right use. Back in 2018 is when personal property was taken out of 1031 like-kind exchanges. So now it really matters, Emily, when we're working with folks who are selling property, to make sure they understand what the real property is and what the personal property is.
So tell us a little bit about reverse exchanges and how do they work?
What we're used to seeing in a normal 1031 is a client is selling property A and they use the 1031 to buy property B. Well, what happens if, for whatever reason, let it be a contractual issue, let it be a market demand, let it be the need for construction or improvements to a piece of property where they fully want to utilize 1031 funds for both the purchase and the improvements, meaning they have to close and take title to property B they want to buy before they're actually able to sell their property. And there comes the reverse exchange. The issue that we needed to get around to help the taxpayer with this 1031 is a simple rule by the IRS, which they state a taxpayer cannot use 1031 money to pay off or improve property for which they are already in the line of title. So it would be impossible for them to buy property B and then use any proceeds from the sale of A to be a benefit through a 1031 on that property B. So basically, we're stepping into their shoes, Emily. We take assignment of the purchase contract for the client. We actually go to the closing table after forming an LLC, and that LLC is going to buy property B for the taxpayer. And that's the easy part. The more difficult part comes in that the LLC that we created specifically to buy property B for the taxpayer has empty pockets, has no money. So that LLC we created needs to be funded to make the purchase of B. And so either the taxpayer that we're working with has the capacity to personally lend the money to the LLC, or they work with a third-party lender, and that lender makes a loan in the name of the LLC with the taxpayer being the full faith and backer of that loan. So two things have been accomplished. We've got the assignment of the purchase contract. Now we have the money. Now we buy property B for the client and we park that property in the garage for them. And we can park it for 180 days. That's as long as we can hold it. So what we want to see, and the taxpayer wants to happen, is they want to then sell property A in a normal 1031 like-kind exchange. And the property they're going to identify in their forward 1031 is the property that we're holding for them in the parking garage. Okay. And they'll use the proceeds from the sale of A. The qualified intermediary will transfer those funds to the exchange accommodation title holder, or the EAT for short. And that's who we are in that transaction. We're the EAT. We take the money from their forward 1031, and we use that money to either pay back the taxpayer who personally lent us those funds, and we transfer the property to them, or we use that money to pay off the third party hard money lender, whoever it might be, as much in the way as possible, transfer the property over, and then the taxpayer works with that lender to set permanent financing on the backside. The interesting thing about that is that while we hold that property for them in the LLC, Emily, we're going to triple net lease that property back to the taxpayer. So if they have a tenant that they want to put into the property, if they have a business that they need to go ahead and start in that property, they certainly can. And our triple net lease fee that we would charge is going to be equal to debt service if there was an outside lender. It's going to be equal to insurance, whatever the payments of insurance would be. So it would be a zero net wash to us on the expense side, but that's also great because when we transfer the property from the parking garage to the taxpayer, we generally assign the membership rights over of the LLC over to the taxpayer, which is great because if there's an existing loan, well, it's already in the name of that LLC. Insurance is already in the name of that LLC, and they can just go ahead and take that over. And hopefully, in most cases, we can avoid some extra fees and everything else that goes along with the true closings. When a reverse exchange is needed and it works so wonderfully well.
And it seems like it is very complicated, and it requires a whole lot more hand-holding, I imagine,
Yeah.
from your perspective. And the whole pain point of the 180 days, especially if you are making improvements, you better have all your permits ready, all your engineering done, all those things, and all the trades lined up to be able to finalize all that work, or the whole premise of the transaction could be for nothing if they're not able to fulfill that. As we start wrapping up, I want to talk a little bit about legislation, regulation, and where do you see us going with 1031 tax code rules in the next right now, 5 and 10 years, with current administration? Is it friendly toward 1031 rules? Do we see it changing? What do you see on the horizon, short and long term?
Yeah. So I would say, Emily, every 2 years or so, 1031s come up for discussion. And usually those discussions aren't, at least what I would call favorable, in limiting the amount of tax that might be deferred, or making some changes in the regulations that might have a detrimental effect on our taxpayers. And I would say this, and these are non-political statements that I'm about to make, but in 2017, when we had the first Trump administration, when we had, I think, the House and Senate both on the Republican side, in what we would consider a very, very business-friendly, at least typically, atmosphere up on the Hill, we almost lost 1031s altogether. And what came out of that, again, is what we alluded to a little bit earlier, was personal property was carved out of the 1031 like-kind exchange. So that was a major change. Now, in addition, we got a lot of what people would say are very cool things with accelerated depreciation, things that can offset, what was taken out from the 1031 provision. The main point being, we almost lost it. Now, when Biden came in as a part of his Green Book, there was potential legislation that would cap the amount of deferral that a taxpayer could enjoy through a 1031, which was either $500,000 or $1 million capped per year. We really weren't sure how that was going to play out. Fortunately or unfortunately, some people may feel it never made it through the Ways and Means Committee as a recommendation to be considered. So it never was submitted. It was never taken up, never voted upon. And of course, in this administration, no language has been in place to change 1031 like-kind exchanges from the tax standpoint. So I'm not saying that we feel safe for the next 3 years on 1031s. Our kind of governing body, the Federation of Exchange Accommodators, certainly talk a lot with our representatives. We go to extreme lengths to explain the benefits of 1031s, from improved tax bases to more available housing in communities.
And I appreciate the point that you brought up, and that this is not just for building generational wealth for individuals and families. This is indeed, the tax code was intended as well to provide some economic stimulus in our country, and by creating jobs and a lot of opportunities, it's doing that. So that's not to be ignored at all. And I think that is recognized in both the House and the Senate, and in the general public, I would say.
I would say so.
hope.
Especially if they've done one. Yes, they
Yes,
see it.
exactly. Well, I just so appreciate you being here with me today, and I learned some things, and I know that our audience will certainly learn so many things from you being here and answering all these questions and really diving into all the nuance. But it's wonderful to be able to have you as a partner, a trusted partner, and be able to navigate all those details like I've talked about before. There are so many, and you don't want to mess up when it relates to your tax bill and what you're intending to do. You need a strong advocate like your group to be able to pull that off. So I really appreciate you spending the time with me, and we'll do it again.
I hope so, Emily.
Yeah.
Number one, I always love talking with you, and then being able to talk with you and help some others out. Maybe that's even better. So
Mhm.
thank you for having me on.
Thank you.